Hello everyone and welcome to Game 5 of the World Chess Championship 2021 between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Magnus Carlsen. The first 4 games ended in a draw, but the first 4 games always end in a draw. This is now Game 5. Jan has the white pieces and we'll see what happens, as tomorrow is again a rest day, so maybe he strikes today and then he enjoys his rest day. But maybe not. Let's check out the game and see what happened. But as usual, I know you guys are really wondering what happened with the handshake this game. So it was not all that impressive. Here you can see Magnus arrives after Jan. Jan gets up from his chair, and it was basically a repetition from the handshake of the handshake in Game 3. So nothing out of the ordinary. Magnus, matching his suit with the color of the pieces that is playing. So he's shifting black suit, black pieces, white pieces, and that's pretty much it. So that's what we have for the handshake, so we can enjoy that for a little bit. And the first move was made by this gentleman. It is Sheikh Nahyan bin Mubarak Al Nahyan, the Minister of Tolerance and Coexistence, and he chose the move c4. Now Nepo was not very impressed with that. He retracted the c4 move, and you can see that Magnus is very interested in this move, but he knows that Nepo probably will not go for the English. But still his mind wanders, and he does have something prepared for it. That's for sure. But Nepo retracts this c4 pawn, and he plays e4. Will we see a repetition of what's been going on in the previous games, or something new? Let's check it out. Magnus replies with e5. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to b5. So again, we have the Ruy Lopez. So in the first attempt of the Ruy Lopez, we've had the sort of anti-martial, then we had the anti-martial, and now I know you guys are wondering, will we see the martial? Let's see what was played. a6 martial. Magnus goes for the Morphy defense with a6. We have bishop to a4, knight to f6, castles, and bishop to e7. So repeating everything from the previous games. Rook to e1 and the b5 now, challenging the bishop on a4. We have bishop to b3, and here we have castles by black, and now a4. So repeating game 3, but now Magnus doesn't go for bishop to b7 like he played in game 3, but rather he goes for rook to b8. And this is all very standard stuff of the anti-martial. Nothing new here so far. We have a captures on b5, a captures, and now h3, taking away that g4 square from black's pieces, and Magnus goes d6, preparing to go bishop to e6 at some point, but we also have to see that Carlsen's knight on c6 is undefended, so he has to be careful a little bit, otherwise this could be taken advantage of. So here we have c3, Magnus Nepo preparing this d4 push, and now you could play a lot of things here. You could play bishop to b7, you could play bishop to e6, you could even play maybe bishop to d6. d7 looks a little bit weird, but you could play it. But Magnus, of course, goes for b4. This is the essence of the position, and he wants to put pressure on Nepo's very strong center, as Nepo is preparing to play d4. So here, d4 would be, it's just not all that promising for white. If you play d4 right away, Magnus would just trade here. For example, captures. We could see a capture here. We would see a capture here. Now Nepo with a very strong center. Magnus could get his d5 move in. But now, for example, after e5, knight to e4, this is very good for black. Niels Grandelius mentioned something about if you skip the move rook to e1 and the rook is still on f1, maybe you can play something like knight to e1 and then kick away the knight with f3. Not this exact same position, but sort of an idea of skipping the move rook to e1 to avoid getting such a position from black. But okay, after b4, we have d3. You still wait with the d4 for the moment. You're just developing, strengthening your center. We have b captures on c3, b captures, and now, okay, the queen is guarding the bishop, so you don't have to worry about that. There is a game in the database where knight to d7 was played between Yuri Balashov and Vyacheslav Yanosha from 1992, but here in this game, we have d5 right away by Magnus, so it is now as of move 13 that we have a completely new game. Now, how do you react to this? Well, you most certainly don't capture this. This is kind of how chess works. You never capture, and you always want your opponent opponent to capture, and your opponent wants the exact same thing. So here, if we capture, then we just improve the position of black's pieces, for example. And especially if we go after the pawn, knight captures, and rook captures, that's sort of like accepting the pawn in the martial attack, or you will simply allow black to develop a lot, and now you have this powerful knight on d5, and now let's say you capture here, captures, we can play bishop to e3, threaten this guy here, but now black plays c5, and you know, it's a very much playable position where black has the bishop pair, and he pretty much solved all of his developing problems, so not something Nepo is eager to test. So instead, after this d5 move, sort of the delayed marshal, we have knight b to d2 by Nepo, saying, okay, if you want, you capture in the center, which Magnus does. We have d captures on e4, d captures on e4, and now we have bishop to d6, just strengthening that e5 pawn, and Magnus lost quite a lot of time here. Nepo is still on almost 2 hours, so he didn't spend any time pretty much reaching this position, and Magnus already spent some half an hour. And here we have queen to c2. The real question is, why is Magnus allowing knight to c4? Because it looks like such a nice idea, but it would seem that Magnus doesn't care about the bishop. There's a pawn on e5, so you don't really expect this bishop to become a powerful attacker, and maybe Magnus would be very happy if knight captures, pawn captures was played, so maybe he can play d5 at some point and just get rid of that lonely pawn on c7. So Nepo doesn't go for this. Instead, after bishop to d6, he plays queen to c2. He just continues development. And now, now the e4 pawn is guarded by the queen as well. So this is something to also be taken into consideration. We have h6 by Magnus, and now we have knight to f1. There was some talk of Nepo going g4, g5, or maybe some sort of an aggressive attempt against the black king, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So here, knight to f1. He wants to play knight to g3 and get his knight all the way to f5. Knight to e7. Magnus now with the exact same idea. Maybe knight g6 to f4 can be played. Knight to g3, we have knight to g6, and again Nepo very, very quickly played bishop to e3, and you can see that white's position is very, very enjoyable, whereas Carlsen still has to figure out how to develop pretty much most of his forces. And here, Carlsen played a very interesting move, queen to e8. And Magnus is already below the 1 hour mark. Nepo still didn't spend all that much time. And I will just show you how interesting the position is, and why it can be very dangerous if you prepare yourself with very strong engines, as these guys no doubt are. Here, the Norwegian supercomputer CAISSA suggests queen to e7. I will just show this move because it's ridiculous. I mean, you're basically inviting knight to f5, but the point is, after white goes knight to f5, which is the strongest move, you just go back, queen to d8. This is how supercomputers play chess, and now you're saying, I will only now play bishop to e6, because now you already have a threat with the knight on f5. You're threatening knight captures on e4. After queen captures, you're going to pick up the bishop on b3. So here you're going to move the bishop, and now we're going to play bishop to e6. And now the thing is, after the bishop is captured, we're going to double up our pawns here to kick away the knight, and after knight captures, c captures, we get this massive pawn mass in the center. For example, rook e to d1, putting pressure on the pawn as the queen is still on d8. Queen to c7, we're going to play rook to a6, put more pressure here. Rook f to d8, and now c4, maybe stopping a move like d5, but all in all, a very enjoyable position for black. So it's a fine position if you are able to play like a supercomputer, but if you're not, it can be very hard to play this. So Magnus instead goes queen to e8. He wants to get this bishop to e6, but he doesn't want to allow the doubling of the pawn, so he's preparing to recapture with the queen. We have rook e to d1 by Nepo, but also there was a very interesting move here, c4. c4 is the move that probably could shift the favor a little bit over to the white side, as you're threatening c5. If black allows this, it's just not going to be very pleasant, but then again, it's hard to say. For example, if you play c5, it's not all that great. You're going to play bishop a4, attack the queen, and after the queen moves, rook e to d1. So you can sense that white is enjoying this position very much. Later on, you can maybe even bring this knight over to the d5 square. It's going to be a monster knight. The thing is, after the c4, Magnus could just play bishop to b4, attack the rook here, and then after rook e to d1, now play c5 himself. And now it's a bit of a different story because, well, the bishop is not locked in there on e7, but still, the same idea can be applied. Bishop to a4, let's say queen e7. Now we can play bishop to c6 and place the bishop on d5 instead of the knight. It's going to work just as well, and this is now a monster bishop, and black really never wants to capture this and allow white to have a protected pass pawn such as this one, or capturing with the e-pawn regardless. All depends on what black plays. So it would be very, very unpleasant had Nepo went for c4 here, but after queen to e8, he played rook e to d1. You can see that rook e to d1 was a very useful move in both of the lines that started with c4, so maybe he's just preparing c4, but now Magnus will not allow it. Now Magnus plays bishop to e6, puts pressure on his... on the bishop on b3, and now c4 isn't all that impressive because you can just play queen to c6 and you don't have to worry about such things. Even if c5, then you even lose the game, just bishop captures on b3. But even if you didn't have bishop captures on b3, the queen on c2 is undefended, so you can never really capture. So c4 is no longer an idea. So here we have bishop to a4 now, attacking the queen, and bishop back to d7. And here we have bishop to b3, bishop to e6, bishop to a4, and bishop to d7. And it was in this position on move 23 that they agreed to a draw. That, of course, is a joke. Of course, they did not agree to a draw on move 22. After bishop to d7, Nepo continued with knight to d2. He now wants to play knight to c4, as this knight was, bound to come to c4 at some point in the game. And what do you play here? Well, although instead of this move, you could maybe avoid a trade, you could play bishop back to b3, but then we might see a repetition, or you could trade yourself on d7 if captures, and then c4. Again, it's very nice if c5 can be played, but queen to c6, and you don't really care. If c5 now, again, it's not really an issue. You can play bishop back to e7, and now maybe you can pile up on this pawn. Maybe knight goes here, attacks the pawn. Rook goes here, attacks the pawn. Who knows? But it doesn't appear to be a very good idea. So instead, Nepo goes knight to d2. He just wants to keep the tension, play knight to c4, put pressure on this bishop. And now Magnus decides to trade everything. Bishop captures on a4, and this is usually the best course of action when your opponent is controlling more space and he has more wiggle room on the board. You want to, of course, trade down as much as possible. So queen captures, we have queen captures, rook captures, and now even rook to a8, trading off rooks here. We have rook d to a1, Nepo doubles up here, we have captures, and now rook to b8, hoping to get some action along the second rank, but now comes rook to a6. It seems like for the moment, maybe not the greatest of ideas, even though you can play rook to b2, just put pressure on the knight. After knight to c4, you're really not doing all that much with that rook there. The rook is attacked, also knight captures, bishop here is a threat, so it's not all that impressive. So what you could do instead after rook to a6 is you could go knight to d7. That's definitely an idea. And after something like knight to f5, go bishop to c5. Just offer a trade of bishops here. For example, g3, knight can come to f8, and then after we see a trade here, for example, captures, knight e7, check, king h7, let's say something like rook to a2, and then the game continues. But this is, again, all very, very powerful stuff from a super engine. In the actual game, Magnus played knight to e8. He now wants to bring this knight over here or over here, depending on what black plays. Play f6, bring the king to f7, and try to create some sort of a solid structure before deciding on where to go next. And here, king to f1. Nepo starts bringing the king into the game, which means the endgame has officially started. But Nepo also lost some time. He is now down to 1 hour, whereas Magnus is down to some 40 minutes on the clock. We have knight to f8. Bringing one knight back is a good move, but bringing two knights all the way back, that's world champion material. We have knight f5, an excellent square for Nepo's knight, because now if g6, you can simply eliminate the h6 pawn, so it's not really possible. Knight to e6 by Magnus, and now knight to c4, putting more pressure on that bishop on d6. We have rook to d8, adding another defender, and now comes f3. So this is how Nepo wants to play this. He wants to play g4, h4, h5. But there was the idea of, for example, knight to g3. I will show this again. This is Sesei's line, so very, very strong stuff. And after black continues with the same idea, we're going to play h4 now. King f7, and now white starts bringing the king into the game. Rook to b8. You want to activate the rook here. Rook a5, taking away the c5 square from black's pieces, and now bishop back to f8. You do not want white to have the option of capturing whenever white wants. h5. This is just grabbing more space on the king side, as one should do in an endgame, and now activating the rook. For example, rook to b1, and after knight to f5, the idea is that if black goes after the pawns, you can play g4, and after rook to g1, attacking this pawn, you can play king to f3. So white will get a lot of expansion on the king side, but he will have a very passive king on f3, so not really something to look at. For example, knight d6, we're going to see a trade here, captures, bishop captures, and after knight captures, c captures. This is the sort of well, endgame you get. Rook a7 check, king to e8. So white did accomplish this. He cut off the king from entering the game. He has a beautiful pawn on h5, but other than that, it doesn't seem like the bishop will be all that of all that much use, and you can never start bringing the king into the game because the g4 pawn now is incredibly weak. So this is what you get with perfect play. So instead, Nepo discards that. He plays f3. We have f6 by Magnus, and now g4. We have king to f7 as planned, and now h4, preparing this h5 idea. Bishop to f8, so not allowing this to be a target here, preparing knight to d6, king to e2, and now comes knight to d6. We have knight c captures on d6, and now it seems like a good idea to fix your pawn structure by doing this, but this would weaken your position a little too much, because after rook to a7 check, you can't really go to g6, because then you have ideas like knight captures on h6, and this is now very annoying. For example, pawn captures and h5 checkmate, and you do not want to run into something like that. So after something like this rook to a7 check, you would have to go back king to e8, and now you play something like king to d2, and after, well, black plays anything, it would just be a very good position for white. The thing is, the central breakthrough with d5 is never an option because of bishop to b6, and now you kind of have to move the rook away, and after you move the rook away, we can simply capture here, and after you capture here, we're going to capture here, and after you capture here, there's again the tricky rook to g7, and the white is most likely winning this. It's not going to be able, he's not going to be able to defend this with the black pieces. It's just now too destroyed of pawn structure. Of course, you can't capture, because then just captures with check, and there's a nice fork here, king f7, we're going to capture here, captures, and of course the king and pawn endgame is winning for white. So even though it seems like you should be fixing your pawn structure, that's not always how you should be thinking. So bishop captures on d6, and now Nepo just pushes h5 with 35 minutes on the clock. Magnus some 25 minutes on the clock. Let's see how Magnus now continues. He goes bishop back to f8. You need to add additional support here, but also you never want white to be the one that has this free pressure of just capturing whenever he wants. So rook to a5, taking away that c5 square from Carlsen's pieces, and only now king back to e8. We have rook to d5, offering a rook trade, which you could go for, but for example, captures, attacks the knight, knight goes back, c4, c5. It's again only white who's better here. So after rook to d5, we have rook to a8, and now rook back to d1. We have rook to a2 check. Finally, Carlsen's rook gets some activity, but now Nepo just blocks it. Rook d2. Well, you could capture, you don't really gain anything by it, and it's not like you have an advantage or anything. So Magnus just played rook a1. Rook to d1, rook a2 check. We have rook to d2. Of course, time control has been reached. This is already move 42, so there's no time pressure or anything. Rook to a1, we have rook to d1, and it was in this position on move 43 that the players agreed to a draw, as there's really nothing you can achieve here, and no hope for doing any more than you already have. So it was a very interesting game. Magnus again chose a very tricky line. Nepo didn't really care much about it. He just blitzed out moves and got a very, very comfortable position. So the real moment where Nepo probably could have gone a little bit better is this after Carlsen played this queen to e8 move instead of the supercomputer queen e7 is this c4 line that we've mentioned, going for c5, but it's a very, very hard move to do, because like we've shown, even if the pawn comes to c5 and you manage to do this, if you don't, if this idea doesn't win, then most likely it's this pawn will just be lost at some point. So maybe that's why Nepo decided against it, but it would seem that this was Nepo's best bet of getting some advantage here in game 5. So another Ruy Lopez. Will we see a Marshall in game 7? That's what everyone is wondering, or will it be another a repetition of this anti-Marshall stuff with the h3 and the a4, and maybe an early d3 without rook to e1, like Niels recommended. So we'll see what happens. This is game 5, already 5 draws in a row, and we'll see if this continues. Will we have 14 draws, or will we see some blood? Because if we see one decisive game, then we're gonna see many decisive games. But without that one, it's very hard to imagine that either of players go for something wild. But it's still very early on, and players, even though they're playing incredibly precise now, of course they will get tired. They will be playing for 2 weeks, and then who knows what will happen. But that's why we're here, to enjoy it. So let's see what happens. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed that. I would like to thank John Anderson, Snix McGlees is bogus, Christian Schwartz, Showers Philip, and Faran Tavar for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the World Chess Championship until it ends. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.